A single photograph taken in 1904 shows the Ashford Children's Home, a building that was officially listed as abandoned. Records state it was gutted by a fire 5 years prior in 1899. The structure sits empty against a gray sky, its windows dark and hollow. But this image holds something unexpected. The photograph is grainy, a product of its time. The exposure is uneven and the edges are soft. But in one specific upstairs window, a small, pale figure is visible. It appears to be watching the photographer. This single detail has puzzled historians for decades. The shape is unmistakable. It is the silhouette of a child standing motionlessly behind the glass. This image is more than an alleged ghost photo. It is the starting point of an investigation. It uncovers a story not of the supernatural, but of a calculated, cold-blooded conspiracy. The investigation reveals that the orphanage's official history is a lie. The fire was not an accident, and the children were not all accounted for. The figure in the window is the only remaining clue to a crime that was almost perfectly erased from history. The Ashford Children's Home was founded in the 1870s in rural Connecticut. It was run by a private charitable board made up of wealthy local families. Dr. Margaret Sinclair is a local historian who has spent years studying the institution. She explains the orphanage's reputation in the community. It was seen as a pillar of charity, a place where abandoned children could find shelter and education. The home was run by the formidable Catherine Harlow, a woman known for her strict discipline and her ability to manage the institution's finances. Dr. D. Sinclair details the official record. On November 4, 1899, a fire supposedly started in the kitchen. The blaze destroyed most of the building and official records. The board officially dissolved the charity, stating all surviving children had been transferred to other institutions across the state. The building was left as a ruined shell. No effort was made to rebuild. The property sat empty for years, a monument to tragedy. The 1904 photograph was taken by Samuel Whitmore, a tourist with an interest in what he called ruin photography. Whitmore traveled through New England capturing images of abandoned buildings. He used a large format camera with glass plate negatives. The technology required long exposure times and careful setup. Whitmore documented his travels in a journal, noting the date and location of each photograph. His journal entry for the Ashford image is brief. He describes the building as desolate and mentions an uneasy feeling while taking the shot. Dr. James Bellamy is a photography expert specializing in early 20th century imaging techniques. He was asked to analyze the original glass plate negative. The plate was discovered in a private collection in Massachusetts and donated to the Connecticut Historical Society in 1987. Dr. Bellamy conducted a thorough examination using modern digital scanning equipment. Dr. Bellamy confirms the image's authenticity. It is not a double exposure. It is not a chemical smudge or a trick of the light. The glass plate shows no signs of manipulation or tampering. The expert confirms that the plate captured what was there. The clear silhouette of a small child standing motionlessly in the window of a building that was supposed to be empty for 5 years. The figure's posture suggests it was looking directly at the camera. The size indicates a child between 8 and 12 years old. The photo proves something was in the building. But what? The investigation now shifts from the image to the archives, searching for the records that supposedly burned. If the fire destroyed everything, how can researchers reconstruct what happened? Patricia Hollis is an archivist at the Hartford County Record Office. While the orphanage's own files are gone, the county's financial ledgers and meeting minutes from the board are not. These records were kept separately as required by law. Patricia began examining the documents in 2003 as part of a broader research project on charitable institutions. Patricia finds disturbing anomalies. In the 2 years before the fire, financial transfers from the orphanage's accounts to a private company run by Thomas Grayson increased dramatically. Grayson was a board member and the owner of a textile mill. Donations meant for food and clothing were being siphoned off. The ledgers show monthly payments labeled as supply purchases, but the amounts far exceed what would be reasonable for the number of children listed in residence. Simultaneously, Dr. Sinclair reviews town census data and newspaper archives. She finds that in the months before the fire, at least 6 children who were publicly listed as residents simply vanish from all records. They are not on the transfer lists. They are not listed among the deceased. They are simply gone. The local newspaper, the Ashford Weekly, reported on the orphanage regularly, but between March and October of 1899, there are no mentions of children leaving or being adopted. The disappearances are silent. The narrative is now clear. There was significant financial crime. There were missing children. And then there was a convenient fire that destroyed the evidence. The photograph from 1904 now takes on a more sinister meaning. What if the figure in the window is connected to the missing children? What if the official story of the fire is a cover for something far worse? The investigation needs a direct link, someone who can provide first-hand testimony or documentation. Robert Chen is a genealogist who specializes in tracing family histories through the 19th century. He was contacted by researchers seeking any surviving documents from Catherine Harlow's family. Robert tracks down the descendants of the former head matron. Her great-granddaughter, living in Vermont, still possesses a trunk of family papers. In the private family collection, a personal journal is discovered. The journal belonged to Catherine Harlow herself. It spans the years 1895 to 1900. The entries are detailed and methodical. They reveal a woman who kept meticulous records of her activities, both official and unofficial. The journal details the conspiracy. Catherine Harlow and Thomas Grayson were not just embezzling. They were trafficking children. The missing children were sold to wealthy families or factories. They were unregistered ghost orphans, whose existence was known only to the matron. Harlow describes them in her journal as strays, children who arrived without proper documentation or who were brought in by desperate parents with no way to verify their identities. These children were never officially recorded. They existed in the shadows of the institution. Harlow writes about negotiations with buyers. Some children were sold to families who could not have children of their own. They were passed off as distant relatives. Others were sent to work in mills and factories, where child labor was still common despite growing reform movements. The journal includes coded references to payments received. The amounts are substantial. Thomas Grayson handled the logistics, using his business connections to arrange transportation and false documents. The journal states the fire was arson. It was set by Catherine Harlow and Thomas Grayson to cover the financial tracks and, crucially, to dispose of any children who were too sick or too old to be sold. The official story of a successful evacuation was a fabrication. Harlow writes that the fire was necessary. She describes it as the only way to erase the evidence of the ghost children. The entry, dated November 3, 1899, one day before the fire, is chilling. She writes that the plan will be executed the following night. She lists the names of 3 children who will not survive. The journal also reveals that the fire did not go exactly as planned. Harlow mentions in a later entry that one child escaped. She does not provide a name. She writes only that a boy managed to flee into the woods during the confusion. Harlow notes that she and Grayson searched the area but found nothing. They assumed the child died of exposure. The journal entry is dated November 10, 1899. The question now is whether this escaped child could be the figure in the photograph. The timing fits. The fire occurred in November 1899. The photograph was taken in May 1904, 5 years later. Could a child survive that long in an abandoned building? Samuel Whitmore, the photographer, also filed a report with the local constable, Deputy Henry Walsh. The report was discovered in the town archives alongside other records from the period. Whitmore claimed to have seen a child in the ruin. He stated that after taking the photograph, he approached the building. He called out, but no one responded. He noticed movement in the same upstairs window. When he climbed the exterior stairs to investigate, he found no one. But he did find signs of recent habitation: a small pile of blankets, empty food tins, and a crude stove made from bricks. The report was dismissed by Deputy Walsh as fantasy. The constable wrote in his notes that Whitmore was a stranger with a vivid imagination. He filed the report and took no further action. There is no record of any follow-up investigation. Dr. Sinclair posits two theories about the figure in the photograph. Theory 1 is that the figure is a photographic anomaly, an imprint of the tragedy. Perhaps the long exposure captured some residual effect, a shadow or reflection that resembles a child. This would make the figure the only ghost in this story, a visual echo of the children who died. Theory 2 is more chilling. The figure was a lone survivor, a child who escaped the fire and the trafficking, living in the ruins for years, hidden from a town that believed the orphanage was empty. The figure in the window was not a ghost, but the last witness. This theory is supported by Whitmore's report and the physical evidence he found. If this theory is correct, then the child lived in the abandoned building, scavenging for food and hiding from anyone who came near. Why would a child remain in hiding? The answer may lie in trauma and fear. If the child witnessed the fire and understood that it was intentional, they would have reason to distrust all adults. The orphanage was isolated, surrounded by woods. The nearest town was 3 miles away. A frightened child could survive by stealing food from farms and staying out of sight. The journal provides a possible identity. Harlow mentions a boy named Thomas, one of the ghost children who arrived without papers. She describes him as approximately 9 years old, quiet, and resourceful. The entry about the escaped child comes shortly after references to Thomas. While Harlow does not explicitly name the child who fled, the timing suggests it could be the same boy. What happened to this child? There are no further records. No one matching the description appears in census data or school records from the area. The most likely explanation is grim. If the child survived in the ruins for months or even years, they eventually succumbed to illness, injury, or exposure. The harsh New England winters would have been particularly deadly. The photograph did not capture the supernatural. It captured the human. It is the only surviving proof of the ghost children erased by Catherine Harlow and Thomas Grayson. The image is not a haunting, it is an accusation. It stands as evidence of a crime that was almost perfectly concealed. The conspiracy was never officially investigated. Catherine Harlow died in 1907. Thomas Grayson died in 1912. Neither faced justice for their actions. The journal was not discovered until a century later. By then, all the principals were long dead. The only legal action taken was the return of some embezzled funds to the state, following the discovery of the financial records. But this settlement was administrative, not criminal. The broader implications of this case are significant. How many other institutions operated similar schemes? The late 19th century was a period of weak oversight and poor record-keeping. Orphanages, workhouses, and asylums were often run by private boards with little accountability. Children who entered these institutions could vanish without anyone noticing. The Ashford case is likely not unique. It is simply one of the few where evidence survived. Modern researchers have attempted to identify the missing children using the fragments of information available. Dr. Sinclair has compiled a list of names from various sources, including newspaper notices and church records. She has identified at least 11 children who passed through the Ashford Children's Home and subsequently disappeared from all documentation. These are the confirmed ghost children. The actual number is likely higher. Efforts to locate descendants of these children have been unsuccessful. Without knowing where they were sent or what names they were given, Tracing their fates is nearly impossible. Some may have lived full lives under assumed identities. Others almost certainly died in the fire or soon after. The lack of closure is one of the most troubling aspects of this case. The photograph itself is now housed at the Connecticut Historical Society. It is displayed alongside the archival materials that tell the full story. Visitors often stop to stare at the figure in the window. Some claim to see more detail than others. Some insist the child is looking directly at the camera. Others see only a vague shadow. The image remains ambiguous, open to interpretation. What is not ambiguous is the documentary evidence. The financial records, the journal, the constable's report, and the photograph together form a clear picture. The Ashford Children's Home was the site of systematic abuse, trafficking, and murder. The fire was not an accident. The official story was a lie, and at least one child may have survived to witness the aftermath, living alone in the ruins, visible to anyone who looked closely enough. The story of the Ashford Children's Home is a reminder that history is often hidden in plain sight. Photographs capture more than we realize. Documents tell stories that were meant to stay buried. The figure in the window is a symbol of all the forgotten victims, the children whose lives were erased by those meant to protect them. What other forgotten stories are waiting in the backgrounds of old photographs? What other crimes are documented in archives that no one has examined? The past is not always distant. Sometimes it stares back at us from a window in an abandoned building, waiting to be seen.